Some cases haunt investigators for years. Some secrets are buried so deep, they seem impossible to uncover. But 7 years after an innocent child's life was stolen, justice finally caught up with a killer who thought they'd gotten away with murder. This is the story of how one moment of evil shattered multiple lives forever, and how the truth, no matter how well hidden, eventually comes to light. I'm your host, and this is Twisted Tales TV. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in June 2016 when 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez vanished from her suburban neighborhood in Riverside, California. Emma was the kind of child everyone adored. Bright brown eyes, an infectious laugh, and a love for drawing butterflies in her sketchbook. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, described her as their sunshine. That Saturday, Emma asked if she could ride her bike to her friend's house 3 blocks away. It was a route she'd taken dozens of times. Her parents said yes, reminding her to be home by 5 p.m. for dinner. Emma never made it to her friend's house. By 6 p.m., Maria's calls went unanswered. By 7 p.m., panic set in. By 8 p.m., police were searching the neighborhood with flashlights and growing dread. Emma's bike was found 2 days later in a drainage ditch near the edge of town. There was no sign of Emma. For weeks, the community rallied. Search parties combed through fields and forests. Volunteers posted flyers on every street corner. The local news ran Emma's face on every broadcast. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, hope began to fade. The investigation hit dead end after dead end. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, no forensic evidence. It was as if Emma had simply vanished in a thin air. Detective Sarah Chun, the lead investigator, refused to give up. But even she had to admit the trail had gone cold. The Rodriguez family was left in agonizing limbo. No answers, no closure, just an empty bedroom and unanswered questions that would haunt them for 7 long years. Just 4 houses down from the Rodriguez family lived a man named David Brennan. David was 42 years old, a quiet maintenance worker at the local community college. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. He lived alone in a modest house with overgrown hedges and peeling paint. In the immediate aftermath of Emma's disappearance, police interviewed David along with dozens of other residents. He claimed he'd been home that afternoon, working in his garage. He seemed cooperative, if nervous, but investigators found nothing suspicious. David expressed sympathy for the family. He even joined one of the early search parties. What no one knew was that David Brennan was living a carefully constructed lie. For 7 years, he continued his routine. Work, home, occasional trips to the hardware store. He kept his distance from the Rodriguez family. Though he'd see Maria sometimes at the grocery store, her face aged by grief. David never spoke about Emma. He never asked about the case. He simply existed. But secrets have a way of eating away at even the most carefully maintained facades. In early 2023, David's behavior began to change. Co-workers noticed he seemed increasingly anxious. He called in sick more often. He started drinking heavily. One colleague, Janet Morrison, later told police that David seemed haunted. It was like he was being chased by something only he could see, she said. What was happening inside David Brennan's mind? Was it guilt? Fear? The weight of 7 years of lies finally crushing him? In March 2023, something inside David finally broke. On March 17th, 2023, David Brennan walked into the Riverside Police Department at 2:47 in the afternoon. He approached the front desk, his hands shaking, his face pale and gaunt. The desk sergeant later described him as looking like death itself. David asked to speak to Detective Sarah Chun. When asked why, he said 5 words that would change. Everything. I need to confess to murder. Detective Chun was called immediately. When she entered the interview room and saw David Brennan, she initially didn't recognize him. The man who'd been briefly interviewed 7 years ago had been ordinary, forgettable. This man looked destroyed. What happened in that interview room over the next 4 hours was recorded in its entirety, and it was devastating. David confessed that on June 18th, 2016, he'd been driving home from the hardware store when he saw Emma riding her bike. Something in him snapped. He couldn't explain it. A darkness he'd struggled with his entire life took over. He called out to Emma, claiming he'd found an injured kitten in his backyard. Emma, kind-hearted and trusting, followed him. What happened next is too disturbing to detail fully. But within an hour, Emma Rodriguez was dead. David buried her body in a remote area of the Angeles National Forest, a location he'd scouted weeks earlier during a hiking trip. He'd hidden the site so carefully that despite multiple searches of the area over the years, authorities had never found it. Detective Chun asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why confess now? After 7 years of living free? David's answer was chilling in its simplicity. I can't live with it anymore. I see her everywhere. In my dreams. In every child's face. I hear her voice. I'm already in hell. Prison would be a relief. He provided detailed directions to Emma's burial site. When asked if he'd committed other crimes, he said no. Emma was his only victim, but that one act of evil had poisoned every moment of his life since. Within hours, forensic teams were dispatched to the coordinates David provided. And after 7 long years, Emma Rodriguez was finally coming home. The discovery of Emma's remains was confirmed through dental records. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez were notified on March 19, 2023. In a press conference 3 days later, Maria spoke through tears. For 7 years, we didn't know if our baby was alive or dead. We didn't know if she was suffering somewhere, waiting for us to find her. Now we know, and while our hearts are shattered all over again, at least we can finally lay her to rest. David Brennan was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other felonies. Despite his confession, he entered a plea of not guilty on advice of his attorney. But the evidence was overwhelming. His detailed knowledge of the crime scene, the location of the body, and forensic evidence linking him to Emma's remains left no doubt. In September 2023, faced with the death penalty, David changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, Maria and Carlos were given the opportunity to address David directly. Through tears, Maria said, "You took our daughter. You took our joy. You took 7 years of our lives waiting and wondering. But you couldn't take our love for Emma. That's ours forever. And now, you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars, alone with what you've done. That's not justice, but it's all we have." David sat emotionless, staring at the floor. When asked if he wanted to speak, he simply said, "I'm sorry. It doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry." Detective Sarah Chun, who'd worked Emma's case for 7 years, attended the sentencing. In an interview afterward, she reflected on the resolution. "You never forget the cold cases. They stay with you. I thought about Emma Rodriguez almost every day for 7 years. I'm grateful her family finally has answers. But I wish the answer had been different." The case of Emma Rodriguez raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of guilt, conscience, and justice. David Brennan lived freely for 7 years. He could have taken his secret to the grave. Many killers do, but something inside him couldn't bear the weight. Was it conscience? Mental breakdown? A desire for punishment? We may never fully understand what drove him to confess. What we do know is that Emma's family finally received the closure they desperately needed. Emma was laid to rest in a ceremony attended by hundreds of community members who'd never forgotten her. The Rodriguez family established the Emma Rodriguez Foundation, which provides support to families of missing children and funds search and recovery efforts. This case reminds us that evil can hide in plain sight. It can live 4 doors down. It can look ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable, but also reminds us that the truth has power. Even after 7 years, even when all hope seems lost, Emma Rodriguez will never be forgotten, and her killer will spend the rest of his life remembering what he did. If this case affected you, please take a moment to hug your loved ones. And if you have any information about a missing person, no matter how small it seems, please contact your local authorities. You never know what detail might bring someone home. Thank you for watching Twisted Tales TV. Please like, subscribe, and share this video to keep Emma's memory alive. Until next time, stay safe out there.